Hi friend, this is Waija and you're listening to Dream Brave. My hope is that this space will strengthen your faith, gird you with courage, and encourage you to take the risks worth taking to propel you into the very best that God has for your life. One of the hardest things we can ever cope with in our lives is loss. Loss of a loved one, a relationship, our health, our job, or a dream we once held dear to our hearts. Yet so much of our culture tells us that to lead a victorious life is to pick yourself back up and move on immediately. But where is room for grief? How can we appreciate the mountaintop if we've never trudged through the valleys? In this special season, I interview ordinary Christians who have encountered extraordinary obstacles to find light in the dark and strength in despair. For it's in our trials that God promises us the hidden treasures of darkness, riches stored in secret places, that we may know that He is God. My hope is that these stories of setback will inspire you to find hope in your struggles. Be blessed. Have you ever been hit with devastating news that would change your life forever? Yet, what if our life's devastation would be the catalyst of a deeper redemption? What if God is not done with you because He has a better ending to write to your story? Today, I have a very special guest, a very good friend of mine, whom I've invited on the show to talk about her diagnosis with cancer at the age of 27, to share how the pain that once threatened to destroy her was repurposed into a mission of hope and healing. Because of how this story also delves into suicide, discretion is advised. Having grown up in a dysfunctional family, Marianne's childhood was far from a fairy tale. Emotional, physical, and spiritual abuse haunted her for years, as her father left her at the age of 10 and her mother was declared bankrupt shortly after. As if life had not already dealt her an unfair hand, at the age of 27, she was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, a tumor that grew silently across her chest. Today, I speak with Marianne to learn why this devastating diagnosis became one of the best things that happened to her, and how it catalyzed a deep reconciliation with the people who hurt her the most, her family. I pray that for those of us struggling to find hope in our own broken families, that Marianne's story will offer encouragement and inspiration. Marianne, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Waija.
I feel so special to have you on because Marianne, you're really one of the friends, the very special friends that God has brought you on my journey. I remember the first time I met you, it was like in like a little coffee shop, and you were applying to be a volunteer. Or Kite Song or Kite Dreams, right?
Yeah.
And actually, you were one of the first people who really believed that I should do a podcast, and that was like maybe 2 or 3 years ago already. And so it feels very special for
It's
me.
been 3 years, yeah.
Yeah, so it feels really special to me that the podcast has not only been birthed, but that you are actually on it.
Yay! I'm so excited, and just seeing your journey over the years has been such a privilege. So thank you for having me.
Wow. Well, I actually have to say the same for you, Marianne, because I know when we first met, I think you and I were in very different places of our lives. And I remember the first time I met you, I was so blown away. Like, I have never been to a volunteer interview where I felt so overwhelmed with awe and wonder. So could you take us back to the moment where you received your cancer diagnosis? Because I know that was such a pivotal part of your journey.
Yeah, so I think I was around 27 years old. So definitely was not thinking about cancer. Didn't even know what lymphoma was. And it was at a point where I just graduated from university for about 2 to 3 years, maybe 2 years. And I just paid off my student loans, just officially moved out of my house. I was renting, I was doing well in my career. So everything seems to be going the right direction. Like it was going well. I was like really on a high, right? And then suddenly out of nowhere, I went for a health checkup. And that was how I found out I had a very big tumor across my chest that was growing
Wow.
silently.
Yeah.
And within one day, I was put into the hospital, and 1 week later, I started chemo. So everything basically happened overnight. Yeah, within 1 week from the day the health report came back, the X-ray came back to the chemos. The first day of chemo was 1 week. So
Wow.
it really happened overnight. Yeah.
I'm going to stop you right there, Marianne, because
Mm.
I know when you said, like, it just came out of nowhere. Actually, there was
Yeah.
a very special story to it. I remember you were telling me
Mm.
that at that season of your life, you were dating someone from a different faith.
Mm.
You weren't sure where, in a way, like spiritually, you were
Mm.
headed. But
Mm.
then you actually had a very bad toothache, right? When you were
Yeah.
like offshore, and then God had to tell us about the whole boat journey, and how you really saw like, oh my goodness, this is really God. Because otherwise you wouldn't have discovered the cancer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
My goosebumps are up. So yeah, so back then, my then boyfriend and myself, we were both in Malaysia, 13-hour or 14-hour drive from Singapore. So we're going to
Wow.
come back from this place called Perhentian, and
Um,
yeah, and so we were about to leave, and suddenly the side of my face like hurt so badly. I took
oh,
Panadol, I took everything, painkillers, nothing worked, and the pain was so jarring. And
wow.
at this point of time, I was very far from the faith. I had a weird habit of praying, and I did believe in God. And so
Mm-hmm.
I prayed because I was like, it's really painful. And I just said a
Mm-hmm.
prayer, the typical prayer, God, can you please take away the pain? Like, it's really, really very painful. I don't know how to tahan the whole journey back home. I will go to church. I will go to church. And all I heard was, go and do your health checkup. And I was like, what? No, I'll go back to church. Just get rid of the pain. It's really unbearable. And one more time, go and do your health checkup. At that point of time, I didn't know anything about the Holy Spirit. Didn't think it was the Holy Spirit. I thought it was a weird thing that happened. But true enough, after I came back, it turns out that I had a wisdom tooth eruption, which has nothing to do with the cancer, but I just happened to have a wisdom tooth eruption. So I came back,
Wow.
settled that, and went to do a health checkup. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was how I found out about cancer. But I think more importantly in the story, I feel is that was, I think, how God pursued me.
Yeah.
And that was that one encounter that really changed my life
Okay,
after that.
that's crazy, Marianne.
Mm.
Like you said, you were far away from the faith and you
Mm.
felt like this voice telling you, was it like an external voice or was it like an internal whisper or was it like a sensing? Like, did you actually hear the words?
I think it wasn't, I don't think it's like a loud external voice.
Yeah,
It was more like thought that came by,
right.
but it was so clear. It was almost like a silent whisper, but it's not a whisper. It was very clear. But it
Wow.
was an internal thing that happened. And I know that it's not
Wow.
from me because like, I'm not even thinking about a health checkup. And it was just something that I knew that it wasn't my own thought.
Wow.
Yeah.
That
Mm.
is really, really incredible. That is
Mm.
really incredible. And I think what amazes me is how it just came, okay, that one came out of nowhere, right?
Mm.
Like you were not even thinking about it. And when they discovered the cancer, could you take us through like what were your thoughts and emotions around it? Because I believe that you were actually very well at the time, right?
Mm. Yeah, I was, mid-20s, who would be thinking about cancer? I was exercising all the time. Actually, when the first doctor saw the x-ray, before I was even tested for cancer, she kept asking me, can you breathe? Can you breathe? I'm like, yes, I'm breathing." Apparently, the tumor was restricting my windpipes and it was quite heavily blocked. And she was
Wow.
just wondering, like, how was I even breathing properly or exercising and all that? Wait, sorry, what was the question again?
No worries. Like, what were the thoughts or
Oh,
emotions that
yeah,
went through
okay.
your mind? Yeah,
I think
I'm
I
sure
was
it was very
in
overwhelming at the
Yeah,
time.
I was
Yeah.
really in shock and
Yeah.
didn't know what was going on. Like I mentioned, I didn't know what lymphoma was. People around me didn't really have cancer. I maybe knew what was breast cancer and lung cancer, and that was about it. And so it was really overwhelming. Didn't know what to do. I felt really alone. We haven't really talked about my childhood, but I think in terms of mortality and wanting to live, I've never really wanted to live. That's probably something we'll talk about later, maybe. But living has always been like, oh, I don't really mind dying kind of thing. So
Right.
it didn't really. It was more of a okay, maybe I'm really gonna die. And I think I wasn't even crying or when I was talking to the specialist. It was only until he brought up this question: do you have any family members that I can call?
Right.
And then I said no. And
Mm,
that was when I started crying.
right.
Yeah, so I think the whole thing was really overwhelming. I was in shock.
Yeah.
In the beginning, probably still in denial. I was like, maybe there's something wrong. And I think there was a lot of grief as well. I think when he brought up the topic on family,
Yeah.
I was like, no, like there's no one you can call.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think I remember like one of the things that you shared with me was that it wasn't the cancer diagnosis that hit you hard as
Mm.
much as it was actually realizing that you didn't have family members
Mm.
to rely on, right?
Mm.
And I think
Yeah.
that was the pain. And I think as
Mm.
we talk about that, let's talk about how your childhood was. And I'm
Mm.
really grateful that you've been so brave to actually share about it, because I think it's definitely not an easy topic to talk about. You mentioned to me that your childhood was actually marked by a lot of deep dysfunction and pain.
Mm.
And in what ways did your diagnosis resurface wounds that you thought you had moved past from?
I think the wounds were never really properly dealt with. It
Uh-huh.
was almost like a plaster that was put on. And I think the diagnosis kind of, during cancer and post-cancer, I think everything like got really dug out, everything. Yeah. So I think there was a lot of pain. As a child, I was very lost, very depressed, very confused. Lots of dysfunction. I'm not going to go into details, but I think if you think about things like affairs, you think about abuse, there was divorce, there was bankruptcy, creditors came after us. There was a season where I ran away from home and I was living on the streets, kind of. Yeah, and then after a while, my mom also started, because of the bankruptcy, she also started hoarding.
Right.
And yeah, so there was a lot of things going on, and
Mm,
a lot of pain, a lot of disappointment.
yeah.
Didn't really know how to navigate all of those things.
Mm,
I became very suicidal when I was 10 years old. And even that was not something that I think people around me knew how to deal with it as well. They tried their best to help me,
uh-huh.
but I think a lot of the things were not properly dealt with, properly processed. It was
Right.
just, I felt I had to just plaster something on and, pretend that I was okay. And I think a lot of that pretense over time, just be good, just look like I'm okay, just suck it up, just move on, don't make too much noise, don't see anything. And I think that really eliminated, and I think there was a lot of repressed anger as well.
Mm,
I wasn't
mm.
someone that openly expressed anger because I saw how anger was kind of used as a weapon and how
Yep.
violence came into the picture at home. And so
Yeah.
to me, anger was bad. And so don't be angry, people have it worse, and I would tell myself things like, oh, never mind, at least you didn't get raped, at least you are not
Yeah.
starving and all that kind of things. And so it was very dysfunctional. And I think so much of it came into the form of like, oh, then I need to prove myself. I need to show my worth. And I think that was what propelled me to, work really hard, move out, and, just go full on hardcore chilna kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And I think that crashed. I think that was when cancer came and like, nope, you gotta stop. And I think that just shifted everything for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Marianne, thank you for being so brave to share that story. I know you and I have both, started reading a lot about trauma and trauma recovery. And I think something that you mentioned was when you shared that, you think about other people, oh, like, I didn't get raped, I
Mm.
wasn't starving. I think it's like a form of coping, right? To
Yeah.
minimize our own pain, to deny it. And
Mm.
in a way, it's painful, but in a way, it's also strength that you were able to go through that. And something that I've always been very inspired by is that as you journeyed through cancer and even in your current journey now, like you've not been afraid to look at the hard parts of your past and to actually go against the minimization or the repression and to really like work through those issues. I think for me, as your friend, that has always been the most inspiring part of our friendship. Yeah. Yeah. And I also remember two stories that you shared with me that have really stuck to me up to today. One was when you shared with me that sometimes you have a fear of loud sounds, and actually that's
Mm.
something that I'm battling through. I'm quite in the thick of it at the moment. This loud sensitivity due to some past trauma, and you mentioned that it was because when you were a child that there were creditors banging on your door. Do you mind taking us through that memory?
Mm. I think that was around maybe I would say 10 or 11. And so because of the bankruptcy and because of the failed business, there were, people coming after us.
Right?
And yeah, people banged the doors and it was very scary. We'll be hiding inside. At that point of time, we were still using landlines, right? So they would call the phone all
Mm.
the time. We obviously didn't dare to pick up, but it would ring the entire day. And you can't even like pick up the phone to make a police call because then the phone line will be engaged and they will know that you're inside, right? So you feel so
Wow.
trapped. And I remember we had to put like newspapers to cover the windows and the just to make sure that it looks dark inside and they can't see, blocking out all the
Right.
lights. Don't
Mm.
turn off the don't turn on any like electrical appliances, otherwise they can
Right.
tell, if something is moving. But basically we are like inside your
Oh,
house, but you are, so frightened.
yeah.
And I think over time, when the banging just kept going, yeah, that fear went on even after everything stopped. And even, up to recent years, like when people bang the door, I still get like startled. I don't really dare to
Right.
actually open the door. And it's very embarrassing to say as like a so-called grown woman, right? Like I don't even dare to open the door when someone knocks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing, Marianne. Thank you. I think something that I'm reminded of is how many of us, we try to minimize what happened in our past because we think to
Mm.
ourselves, like, it's okay. We've gone past that.
Mm.
And that was just something that happened in the past. But something I've been learning is about emotional flashbacks and how when an emotional flashback happens, our very present becomes overwhelmed by that moment in
Yeah.
our past. So when you
Yeah.
talked about how even in the present, when someone knocks on the door, it can
Mm.
trigger those moments of
Mm.
fear. Like I experienced that as well. Like when I hear a very loud sound, like for me, it's specific to barking, then it triggers a whole chain of emotions and fears that's tied to something that happened in my family as a child. And so I think it takes so much courage for you to not only share that, but also to journey through that. So thank you for
Mm.
giving us a glimpse into how home was such an unsafe place for you. I remember another story that you shared with me was also how you spent many nights sitting in McDonald's overnight. How was that like for you?
Yeah, it was actually a few years of not being at home. And so I would basically just sleep at McDonald's with my friends. So I basically made friends with people who also, like teenagers who also grew up in homes that they couldn't return to. And so there was this group of us that would just always be at McDonald's. So I'm very grateful for
Mm.
24-hour McDonald's, and at least there's
Wow.
aircon, and it's enclosed. It's not like you're not subjected to like the rain and all those things. But yeah, so I
Mm-hmm.
spent a lot of time there. I think obviously there's a part of sadness, like you can't go home, but I think I did find in some ways like community with my friends, and I was not alone. And I think I was just very grateful to have people who understood what I was going through. But at the same time, it was also a very looking back, I'm just very grateful that, God really kept me. I was surrounded by people who were taking drugs. But for
Wow.
some reason, I just had no desire. And it wasn't because I was like holy or anything. I just had no desire. People were smoking. I tried it, didn't like it. Like there was just this, for some reason, like, it was, and I felt that it was actually protection from God, that
Mm.
I just wasn't interested in any of those things.
Mm.
But because we were also hanging around Geylang, which is like the red light district, right? So it's actually
Yeah.
not the safest place. But somehow, we were always kind of taken care of, and
Oh.
nothing too severe
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when I look back, yeah, it's kind of sad, yet also a very memorable time because of the friendships
Mm.
that were made. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I know you and I, as we delve into trauma recovery, to uncover the pains from our own childhood, I know you shared that you had also come across the book by Gabor Mate called When the Body Says No. And,
Yeah.
we learned that a lot of our current illnesses or the kind of chronic
Mm.
pain that we might go through has got a lot to do with some of our adverse childhood experiences.
Mm.
So have you ever looked back, Marianne, and asked God, like, why me? Like, why did it have to happen like that? And why did you have to give me cancer after I walked through all that? Did you ever feel like it was just one thing after another?
I think the why me happened a lot more when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was going through the whole suicide, my parents were fighting a lot, and
Yeah.
I think that was the period that I questioned the most, and I kept asking, "Where are you, God?" And I would cry, I would pray, I would hide when they fight, and eventually, like I just ran away because it was just too much. But every time I prayed, nothing happened, and
Mm-hmm.
I think the why me was a lot more. That was the period where I just kept asking and I had no answers.
Right.
Funnily enough, when cancer hit, of course, it's like, do I not get a break from this, right? Like it just never ends. But I think because of how fast it escalated, how it happened, and how people just came around me and just like poured their love, and there was so many blessings that came just within that 1 week. Like when I said
Wow.
that I was diagnosed all the way to starting of chemo in that 1 week, like the amount of love that was shown to me was like another level. And I think in that week itself, I just felt like, God, like, okay, I'm not gonna give up. And I know that I've never felt so blessed before, which is a very strange thing to say for someone to receive like a life-threatening diagnosis. But
Mm-hmm.
truly, I think that was how I really felt. And I think from
Wow.
then there wasn't any of the why me anymore. Cause like I don't even have time to think of why me. It was just like recovery mode. And I just felt so loved by the people around me.
I remember you shared this with me when you said
Mm.
that cancer was actually one of the best things that happened to you. Could you tell
Yes.
us a little bit about that, Marianne? Especially when at the time, you couldn't rely on your
Mm.
parents, you had no, nothing to fall back on. You didn't even
Mm.
buy personal insurance. Tell us like what that next level of love looked like.
I think, okay, I will say this, that I will not want it to happen to anyone. And even though I say it's
For
a
sure.
blessing, it was also terrible. It was not fun at all. Like, it was a lot of
I'm sure.
pain and like, oh, like, you can't do anything. You can't even poop properly. Your body
Right.
just shuts down, right? Because you're on
Yes.
chemo, you cannot do anything. And
Yeah.
so, like, it wasn't fun at all. But I
Mhm.
think, like you said, I didn't have any insurance. I had just paid off my student loans. That was the year I was gonna, after paying my student loans, I thought that I would start saving money and I would buy an insurance or something along the
Right.
lines. But, that cancer came before that. But
Wow.
I was working in a company, in a tech company that had such a great insurance. It was all private. So I got to go to private hospitals. That was why it was so fast. And even though it was 90% co-payment, as soon as my colleagues knew, which is the next day because I disappeared from work, they just took matters into their own hands. They didn't even ask me anything. They just started raising funds. And
Wow.
within, I think, 3 days or something, 15K was raised.
Wow.
And they mobilized basically everyone from my life. So the work people somehow, Singapore is not very big, right? And so like people from uni, people from my JC, from secondary school, like random people just started showing up and fundraised like so much money. And even colleagues from overseas were like donating money. And even after I was like, okay, I think we need to stop. I think 15K is enough for now, and then people would still like transferring money on their own. And beyond all this monetary stuff, like my colleagues were the best. They just took everything off my hands. And my
Wow.
team even bought me Netflix because I didn't have Netflix at that point of
Wow.
time. Still don't
Yeah.
actually, but yeah, it's not something that I would spend money on, and they knew, and so they bought Netflix for me. They
Mm.
just found so many different ways to help me. HR was helping me to maximize my leave so that I could, still get paid. And how do you navigate all those different things? And then people will just keep showing up at the hospital. This was pre-COVID, so the limit on the numbers were like basically no limit, and people just kept showing up. My friend's mom would show. My friend wasn't even in Singapore, and her mom would show up with chicken essence or chicken soup like that she made every other day or something, to the point where my housemate's helper would ask me, "Is that your mom?" I said, "No, that's not my mom. That's my friend's mom." And so like
Wow.
it's just never ending stories of like people who some knew me very well, some didn't, and just kept pouring their love out.
Wow.
And yeah, I just felt so incredibly blessed and loved. Yeah.
Wow.
Mm.
Wow. Marianne, every time, I mean, I've heard your story a few times. We've talked about this, but
Eh,
every time I hear it, I always feel so filled with warmth
mm,
because I think about the amount of love that God poured out to you in that season.
yeah.
It sounds to me as if, like, for all the decades of deprivation and abandonment and rejection that you felt, it was like
Mm,
He showed up at that moment to tell
yeah.
you that He was
Eh,
not absent and that He
mm,
was very much looking after you.
yeah.
Right. And I also think that, I smiled inside when you talked to me about how your friends just came and showed up,
Mm,
like the extravagant love that they poured out to you. And maybe you
mm,
don't see this, but I see that they did that for you because of the incredible depth of empathy that you have for other people. And I think we don't say this lightly when we say that,
mm,
pain and suffering is very unpleasant,
yeah.
but it also shapes us into the kind of people that have a very different kind of depth. And I think that's the person you are. I remember when I was in
Oh.
ICU, like when I had my spine
Mm,
operation, like I didn't want anybody to see me when I was in ICU except you and my family, of course. Like I only wanted Cliff and my kids and you, because I
oh.
felt like you understood. So thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah. How did faith reframe your suffering? And throughout all of that, like what happened with your boyfriend at that time? Because he was of a different faith. And
Mm,
then it sounds like, this big pivotal moment? I'm sure it shook your faith, like, oh my goodness, is God suddenly real now? And how did
Mm,
that shake up your relationship with your boyfriend, which I'm sure was very, very close to you
mm,
because you didn't have your family of origin to
mm.
fall back on. How was that like?
Yeah, I was really thankful he was there because, like, my parents are not close
Mm.
to my family, and so the doctor actually called him, and thankfully, he has a little bit of medical background, and he knew what was going on, and I was so thankful to have him around, and just grateful. Like, two of us were just trying to figure this out as 20-something-year-olds, right?
Wow.
But of course, like you said, like the whole, suddenly now God is like, "Hello, I'm here."
Yeah.
And I started to take it more seriously, like, what was that? And I'd been to church before. I actually was baptized as a kid. Went to a
Oh.
Anglican primary school. My dad
Mm.
was just kind of dabbling in Catholicism at that point of time, so it kind of went in and out, but nothing serious. And
Mhm.
but actually, in my 6 years in primary school, I actually started to learn how to pray, and so I kind of knew who Jesus was, but didn't really find a church that I could fit into in my secondary school years, so I kind of just gave up altogether. That's a whole other story. But eventually, when this thing happened, I was like, hey, I think, I got to take it more seriously, and I did. And so after cancer, I was like, okay, I need to go and figure this thing out. Maybe I need to start listening to sermons again, to start reading the Bible and all things like that, and which my then boyfriend was actually really supportive about. And so that's what I did. But eventually, at some point, after going deeper and deeper, and yeah, going deeper in the work and, got better and all those kind of things, it came to a point where, okay, how to navigate this relationship, right?
Yeah.
And of course, the standard prayer, lah, God help me, lah, just convert him, or, something like that. Like, you can touch me, you can touch him also, right? That kind of thing. So I prayed that for like a good couple of years until the point where
Wow.
I think the closer I walked with him, the more I knew that this is a relationship that I had to walk away from, which was really hard. I wrestled for a good 1 year. I was like, God, like, you cannot make me do this to him, like he journeyed with me through cancer, like how, like, and he was a gift. He is, I'm still very thankful for him, and you cannot ask me to break up with someone, like, how?
Wow.
But at the end of the day, I knew that I really wanted to go all in at that point of time. I knew Jesus was the way, and I really just wanted to go all in lah. So I had to put the foot down to actually call it off. But God was so kind, and He just knew, and it was actually the most peaceful breakup ever. It's a very long
Wow.
story, but essentially, like, God really took care of everything, and in some ways, I would say maybe even spoke to Him. I don't know, but it was just such a peaceful, like, breakup. There was no animosity. There was nothing, and
Wow.
yeah, it was just such a peaceful thing. And I just knew that God was really with me in that journey. Yeah.
I mean, a peaceful breakup in light of all that you have walked through sounds like something very trivial, but I think it was huge for you, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because it showed how faithful God was, even as you put Him first.
Mm,
And it sounds like even as you walk through all of this, that faith really helped to reframe your suffering. Because at one
mm,
point, even before the cancer, you said that you were suicidal, you wanted to end your
mm,
life. And
yeah.
that's all very understandable because every child deserves a safe space
Mm,
to call home. And you did not have that. You did not have the
mm,
foundational needs as a child. And yet, after your cancer, now I understand why you say it was the best thing that happened to you
mm,
because it seems like God used that to really like take away and shake all the foundations of your life and give you a new one.
yeah.
But Marianne, at this point, I think I also want to delve into the part about reconciliation with your
Mm,
family. Because I can imagine, so I'm reading a book right now about, it's a famous book by this author called Alice Miller. And it talks about how childhood is actually the only time in your life when you can really receive unconditional love. I mean, this is debatable, but anyway, she's a psychologist and she actually said that once childhood is over, the dynamics in our lives actually change very much. Even if we receive love that is pure, it cannot replace the love that we were meant to have as a child. Because
mm,
in our childhood, that's where safety, that's where our foundational kind of perspective of relationships in the world actually gets set, not just in our hearts, but in actually our brain, like biologically. So I'm wondering, like, as all this happened and your parents were not actually around, I mean, it's been years since that, but I've heard and I've witnessed the incredible reconciliation that has started and still continues to go on.
Mm.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Honestly, this is something that I never expected. I think growing up like that, I kind of gave up hope. Never thought I would see my dad again. I actually ran into him when I had cancer. So I was, bald, and I
Wow.
actually ran into him. And at this point, I have not seen him in, I don't know, 15 years or something, like many, many years. And so
Wow.
I saw him on the train, and he was standing right in front of me, like a meter away, or maybe 2 meters max. Obviously, he didn't recognize me, but I recognized him. And it was the weirdest feeling ever. I remember just feeling so confused, like, am I supposed to feel something? That's my father over there. Uh, but like he doesn't recognize me, I probably wouldn't go up. And so it was a very strange feeling. But other than bumping into him back then, I don't know where he lives, no clue where he is, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, I thought that the next time I would see him would probably be like at his funeral. I actually thought that maybe I would not even see him at the funeral because maybe nobody would contact me when he passes away, right? And so it was not something that was actively on my mind of like, oh, I want to reconcile with my dad. Obviously, I understand like letting go, you don't, when you hold on to bitterness and resentment, you are actually drinking the poison. And, that kind of sayings I understood, and I knew I had to let go.
Mm.
And I learned how to forgive and to heal. And all those things are things that you learn in therapy. In the Bible says that as well about forgiveness. And these are things that are okay, by reconciliation. That's a whole other ballgame. Did not expect that.
That's like next level.
That's next level to me. I'm like, like,
Yeah.
and I think I'm okay lah. I can deal with it myself. Therapy, right?
Right.
You don't have to force someone to come back. The person has to be willing to. And so it really wasn't something that I actively pursued. But I think as I, continued to follow God and just pursue him and all that, I think it really became clear I think Proverbs 16:9 really came to life for me. Like we can plan all we want, but God establishes our steps. And I think that really came to life for me because I just kind of kept going step by step and didn't really know what I was doing per se, or rather I knew what I was doing, but you can't really see the end goal. And I think he really brought me on a journey of, starting with healing myself in therapy. That started during cancer. Also came out of the blue, I just happened to have insurance. A friend happened to recommend somebody, and it just started the whole process.
Right.
And that led to like healing of myself and understanding that a lot of my anxieties, I was still struggling with anxiety, very bad anxiety. I would get anxiety attacks and all that. A lot of my fears with anxiety, public speaking, like a lot of the issues that I had were all rooted in not feeling enough. Or
Mm.
and those kind of things are very foundational, like all
Yes.
started from childhood.
And very
The
deep.
kind of things that your parents did, even though you like forgive them and you don't blame them anymore because you also knew that they were going through their own things. But the kind of messaging that you get, from that age, it carries with you all the
Yeah.
way. And so I started with that. And, then the whole healing process started and, the idea of forgiveness. And I think as I journeyed step by step, he kind of led me down the path of, reconnecting first with my mom. Because at least I knew where she was and, reconnecting with her. And that kind of opened up a little bit of, her story with my dad as well. And, I started getting promptings from the Lord that, hey, he also wants to do something about me and my dad. And I'm like how? And I was like, okay, go ahead. And again, step by step, led me down a whole path of like forgiveness. And eventually I decided that it'd be time to reach out. And that was the craziest thing I've ever done. I found his address and I reached out. And even from the point of reaching out to actually meeting him, it took one whole year because there was just
Wow.
so much fear. There was still a
Yep.
lot of unresolved issues and it's just not on the same page. My dad didn't acknowledge a lot of the things that happened back then. So it was very hard to connect. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I kind of just felt, the prompting to, hey, reach out. And I was like, okay, I'll try. And really step by step, that was in 2023. And, now fast forward 2025, I'm, regularly talking to my dad. I've met him multiple times, had coffee, no longer am scared of him. He has also changed a lot.
Wow.
Yeah, and until today, like, and which is why it's really step by step, and it's a story that's still being written because I don't know where it's going, but it's one of a story that continues to unfold, and I
For
really,
sure.
yeah, it's just such a
I
miracle.
I think for me, what is miraculous and what I really love so much about your story, Marianne, compared to, I mean, the other, success stories that I read about or things like that. I think what makes your story so real and so personal to me is that I would really call it a privilege. I really had the privilege to see and to witness and to hear from you when you were going through those difficult times.
Mm.
When you shared with me like, oh my goodness, my dad wrote back today. I don't know what to
Mm.
say. Or like when you wrote to him,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. And then when you said like, okay, you wrote that to him and then he didn't reply. He just disappeared
Mm.
again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I remember that Sunday where we both met up in church and we were praying so hard together because that was the morning you were supposed to meet him before service. And then
Mm.
after service, we had lunch together. I mean, not with your dad, but after you
Yeah.
met your dad, you and our family
Yeah.
sat down and ate together. And I think we both were so shocked when you told me what happened at that meeting. And he gave you a very special gift.
Yeah.
Would you share with us how shocked you were and what that gift was, what it meant to you?
Long and short of it, I think my dad, after he left, he kind of dabbled into like Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, basically every other religion. And so
Right.
that was what he was, right?
Mhm.
But apparently, like, this is how God is crazy. Like, the timing of it, I have not spoken to him in 20 years. And by the time we met, that was end 2023, and that was actually 20 years. He actually, a few months prior, kind of came to the realization that Jesus is the way, and he kind of returned to
Wow.
Jesus. Because remember, he kind of knew a little bit, was in a Catholic church for a while. And because of that, he actually bought me a necklace, a cross necklace, and had my name on it. And I
Wow.
think more so than that gift in itself, I think the greatest gift to me was actually the Lord's timing. Like, we always complain like,
Yeah.
hey, God, like, too slow, you know? But wow, this one, had I tried to speed it up, I mean, if we met before he accepted, then it wouldn't have had that kind of impact, right? And
Yeah.
because I was also very honest with him and I said that, hey, like, I wish that you were dead, in the past. Over my dead body, I would never sit in front of you to have coffee, but I really believe that the Holy Spirit has transformed me to the point where I can sit here not being afraid of you and, being okay, and actually so willingly wanting to bless you, forgive you, and all these kind of things. Like, who am I? I don't even recognize myself. And I talked about it as well, about the Holy Spirit, and he understood. And I think it would have been very different like months prior. Even through the emails, you could tell that he was a very different person. And just the timing of that meeting, right? I remember, like you said, we actually talked about how at some point I wrote back and he stopped replying, right? I think that was
Yeah.
like mid 2023. I kind of gave up. I was like, you know what? Forget it. Like, this is just, you know. And then fast forward another 6 months, then, this thing happened. And it really just reminds me of the way God orchestrates things is very intentional and very specific. And the timing, you just cannot make it up. And so I think that in itself is a way greater gift to me than, I mean, of course, the necklace was very touched by it, but yeah, I think it was more so like seeing how God did that for me. Yeah.
Marianne, thank you so much for sharing. That is really amazing. Like, something that I've always wanted to ask you is how do you encourage someone who is walking through forgiveness or unforgiveness and the pain of having a dysfunctional family? Because I think the pain runs so deep. Like you said, the wiring that is in your childhood is almost in a way like semi-permanent. I mean, now we know through trauma recovery that this can be reversed over time. But like you said, the wiring is so hard and we carry that brokenness in us.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people are very averse to like spiritual bypassing because like I guess it's a term that people use when you say like you just use a verse to gloss over the pain and instead
Yeah.
of like angering or grieving, which is actually part of the therapeutic process. A lot of
Mm.
times when you enter like a church or something, maybe like the healing minister or the pastor might just say like, oh, you need to forgive and forget because if not, it becomes a poison in you, right?
Mm.
And then we hear these things and instead of feeling lighter, I think many of us actually leave feeling more shame
Mm.
because it doesn't even allow
Cannot.
us, there's no space for us to be angry. There's no space for us to grieve. And I wonder what advice or what thoughts you might have to people who are walking through this. Because I think while you have found faith in God through cancer, I think many people have, in contrast, walked away from the church because they feel you don't understand. Like you are asking me to reconcile with my parents, reconcile with my siblings, but you don't understand or you're not even willing to walk with me. You are only willing to listen and give me a band-aid answer, which is you need to forgive them.
Mm.
Right. And I think that's so painful. Like I enjoyed listening to you, hearing you talk about how many years it took. It wasn't overnight. It was years and years and years. And it was back and forth and it was painful. Sometimes you were disappointed, sometimes you're angry, sometimes you also reacted and were triggered. So tell us, how would you tell someone who is really wrestling with this whole unforgiveness issue?
Oh, this is a really tough one. I
Yeah,
don't have the answers, but I think there really isn't like a very straightforward answer. And I think sometimes we don't know how to deal with the mess, right? And
right?
sometimes it's easier to just throw one verse out.
Yeah,
And to be honest, like, people have told me before, like when I was younger, like, your pain has a purpose. Did not understand this until recent years, right? And over this, I
right.
don't want the pain, I don't want the purpose. Like, just take away the pain, what purpose, yeah? So obviously, like when people say that kind of things, I was also like, huh? And forgiveness, yeah, I understand. And then but at the same time, like how. But I think personally for me, I think it was really just taking the time to sit with myself and, not even
Right.
rushing to the forgiveness. I cannot forgive. I'm still angry,
Mm,
then I let myself be angry. And I think one key thing for me was I saw how it was destroying myself. Like I saw how much I was hurting and I knew
mm,
I had to do something about it because
right.
the anxiety was crippling and all that, and I knew where I was coming from. And through therapy, I think honestly, it started off a bit selfish first. Like, it was more like, okay, I need to fix myself. So I want to heal myself, right? So it wasn't straight away like, oh, I need to forgive. It was more like, okay, I need to deal with myself. And I learned something about, letting go. And, holding on to all these things is actually, we are the one suffering. The person that did whatever to you also not suffering really. And then you are the one like holding on to it. And so
Right.
that was the beginning of it lah. And I think I really started there, or like trying to heal myself and learn how to let go and really heal the wounds first before I could even have the capacity to like think about forgiveness and all those different things.
It's so interesting you say that you're not sure how to answer this question, but maybe because as a third party, actually,
Mm.
I feel that one of the huge things that I've learned from you is actually being gentle and patient with yourself.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
I think a lot of people get angry, feel
Mm.
shame, they walk away
Yeah.
from the church or
Yeah.
even get upset with God because why is it not happening? Like, how do you expect me to
Now.
forgive? Yeah, now. Like,
Mm.
how do you expect me to forgive overnight? And if I don't
Yeah.
forgive, that means I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
And the shame spiral just thickens. But I have seen how over the years you have been very gentle and accepting to yourself. And I think this
Mm.
whole concept of self-compassion, it sounds very fluffy, sounds very
Yeah.
like woolly, but
Mm.
it's so much needed in our own therapeutic journey.
Yeah.
And you've not only gone through the hard work of therapy, Marianne, but you had every chance to go back into your high achieving tech company where the benefits are very, very comfy, there's very
Yes.
cushy safety net. And a safety net is exactly what you need when your parents are not there
Mm.
for you, right?
Mm.
But instead, like the reason why we met was actually because you wanted to take time off
Yeah.
to seek God for what He
Mm.
had next for you.
Yeah.
And then now you are in this season where you are doing a part-time degree to study to become a therapist or counselor. And the
Mm.
last I heard from you, you said that your next step was actually to pursue a master's degree so that you could help others like you.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, that is incredible. That is really incredible. Maybe as we come to the close of our conversation, if you could go back to your younger self, your 10-year-old or the 20-year-old who was struggling with pain and unforgiveness and anger, what would you say to her?
I would say that God is with you. He always has been. And your pain truly has a purpose.
Wow, that is incredible. And what is one treasure that you have found in the darkness through this all, Marianne?
I think for me, the greatest treasure would be the intimacy and the relationship with God.
Wow.
He's the one who created me and he knows me far better than I know myself.
Wow, that is incredible. That is incredible. Marianne, before we wrap up, I can't imagine how it has been. Or maybe I can imagine some parts. I guess maybe that's why, we always joke how you and I are so different, like in terms of personality. And, we always
Yeah.
have that joke saying that if we were actually in the same school, that we would never bump into each other, we'll never make friends because we're just so different, right? But I think something that really bonds us is the challenges that we faced in our
Mm,
childhood. And I haven't reached a place where I feel like open to share about what
mm,
I've walked through and all
yeah.
that. But from your journey, I've learned so much. And one of the things I really take comfort in and inspiration from is your desire to continue to take leaps of faith, to even do a master's degree in an area that you've never kind of like studied
Mm,
in, until now. But I also know how difficult it has been because you have been so obedient. You have been so obedient not to go back to the tech space because you have sought God about it. And even then, I think very few people see the challenges that you face. Like, you don't have the privilege to fall back on, they like to joke, it's like a father-mother scholarship,
Mm.
or like you have to rent your own place and earn your own keep and pay rent in addition to all of that. And I know that the master's has been a very huge financial kind of leap of faith. And so I don't usually do this on the podcast, but because I know that you're doing this entirely by faith without the financial means to back it. But I just want to share with our listeners that if today, if anything in our conversation moved you and you feel led to sow into Marianne's journey, feel free to drop me a note at hello@kitedreams.org and I'll be happy to connect you directly with her. Because I think sometimes the smallest acts of generosity can unlock the greatest stories of redemption. So Marianne, thank you so much for just giving us the opportunity to hear your journey and your story, because it has just, I think, inspired us, and I'll quote you, on a whole new level, on a whole new level on what it means to trust God. And even as you shared with me about your time in McDonald's, sleeping over there, I mean, I've shared this with you before. I have a vision that, one day you will be bringing other people to McDonald's and sharing a meal with them and telling them how loved and how seen they are by God. And thank you for living a life that truly shows us how loved and seen you are and each of us are. So thank you so much, Marianne. Thank you.
Thank you, Waitya. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for being with us.
No. Can I add one line?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it was very funny how you said that, how I step out in faith, but it was actually your story that encouraged me to stay. Because when I first stepped out of faith was when I met you, right? And I think it was your story that kept me going and looking forward at Jesus and not turning back. And so I just want to thank you as well, that I think it was really such a timely time that we met. And that's something that I really thank God for, because had I left any later, I think we would not have met. And there was a lot of pressure, not pressure, but benefits of leaving slightly later, because, I was getting a bonus already at that point of time.
You shared
So
with
I
me.
gave up the bonus for it. But I just knew, God just like, no, now. And then that's like a lot of money. And, HR was telling me, stay, don't leave yet, just 2 more months and you're done. But it was so clear to me at that point of time, God was like, now. And I think that was when I met you, right? Had it been a while later, you wouldn't need a volunteer anymore. You probably would have found someone. And so,
That is
I think God was just so kind to allow me to meet someone like yourself as well, who has stepped out in faith. Hebrews 11:1, walking, and all those verses about walking by faith and not by sight. You have encouraged me so much over the years, and I want to thank you as well. And I want to say again that this is such a privilege to be here and to see the fruit of your labor and to see how the promise has come to pass. You now have a podcast, not trying to build, you have one. And I have the privilege of being here. I don't know what I'm doing here, but to see all of it unfold, I think I'm just so amazed and in awe. And I'm just so thankful to God and to you. And thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you so much, Marianne. Thank you. This is really special. Like, I think you're one of the few people who's continued to call me and pursue me even when our family has been in Tanzania. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thanks, Waitya.
Friend, I hope this conversation blessed you. If you know an ordinary Christian with extraordinary faith whom you'd love to hear me interview, or if that person's you, please let me know. Just drop me a note at hello@kitedreams.org. Be blessed.